You know these guitars that are like double guitars, you know?
So, Felix Martin has a brand new album out. I had the honor of reviewing his album Mechanical Nations for Ultimate Guitar when it came out a couple of years ago. Now, for those who don't know, Felix Martin is sort of an up and coming instrumental guitar player from Venezuela, sort of in that Animals as Leaders, Aaron Marshall, Pliny, Angel Vivaldi sort of vein, but he tends to throw his own sort of Latin American flair into all of the music that he does, considering that he came up in that whole Venezuelan sort of folk music sort of tradition. And as such, a lot of his music has that very strong sort of Latin American vibe to it. So, talking a bit about Mechanical Nations, his last record, I did review that for Ultimate Guitar. I was maybe a little bit harsh with it. You see, the problem is that even though he has a very unique style of playing, where he essentially has a guitar that's sort of two guitar necks in one, and he plays both through tapping and fingerstyle, it does kind of come off sounding a little bit, dare I say, predictable and derivative at times. Not all that unlike guitar players like Tosin Abasi. Mechanical Nations suffered from sort of having a very one-dimensional kind of sound to it. It was all very much clean guitars, a lot of that sort of tappy, thumpy sound, not really a lot of anything else going on that record. It was very clear listening to the record that Felix Martin was a very talented musician and a very skilled writer. He was very good at coming up with melodies, just maybe not the most heavy in terms of variety. And now we're on his new album, Caracas, which is named after the capital city of his home country of Venezuela. Now, I'm going to butcher so many of these song titles, it's not even funny. But this is sort of a bit of an improvement over what he did on Mechanical Nations. I found that there was a lot more variety on this record, a little bit more distorted guitar, more traditional sounding guitar solos here and there, more than just the usual tapping and thumping technique that he's been using on Mechanical Nations and other albums in the past. Frankly, it kind of sounds like some of his pre-Mechanical Nations music, where there was a little bit more of an effort to sort of go for the metal side of things. And this really shows on the first few tracks. Again, I'm not going to do justice to these song titles. I do not speak Spanish. Quitapesares is the opening track, and it has a very well done music video for it that was filmed in some of Felix Martin's hometowns where he grew up. It does a really good job of conveying that sort of Latin American rhythmic and melodic feel, but mixing in some of the heavier guitar riffs that we kind of knew he was capable of, but that he never really explored much on Mechanical Nations. There are a couple more sort of similar tracks following Vaca Mariposa and Pajarillo? Pajarillo. I don't speak Spanish. And Querencia, which, all kind of do a lot of the same things that Quitapesares does. A lot of very Latin music-inspired melodies and harmonies. A lot of that tapping, thumping technique, which, is kind of Felix Martin's bread and butter at this point. But he does actually do a couple of interesting things on this album, where there's tracks like Grey Zuliana, which is a fully acoustic track. He actually has a custom-built acoustic guitar in that similar sort of double fingerboard tap-thump vein. Now, around the second half of the album, I do tend to sort of start to tap out a little bit. It does kind of drag on a little bit with the same styles, and I realize that there's a cultural element to this album, that he is very much trying to go for that very Latin-inspired groove and mentality. And, of course, I can't knock that too hard. He's absolutely doing justice to his home country and their musical traditions with the music on this record. But I do find that the lack of variety in the actual musical styles does kind of get a little bit monotonous by the end of the record. It could have benefited from having more of a gentle, tender ballad, or maybe a track that's just full-on metal the whole way through, bigger riffs, maybe some more pummeling drumming. And even though I go on a lot about these sort of Latin American-inspired melodies and rhythms, there are a few that just sort of crop up in every song, and they're kind of the expected moves. It was enough that on some of the later songs, like Tonada de Luna Llena, I believe it's pronounced, it actually really sort of broke the monotony just to have a traditional sounding guitar solo pop up in the song. It did kind of draw me back in for that one fleeting moment near the end, but like I said, I did find myself sort of tapping out a little bit in the second half of the record. That being said, I don't want to be too harsh on this record because Felix Martin is an incredible musician and absolutely one of the most talented guitar players out there right now, and I really love what he does with the instrument. It's a very unique style, and it's actually kind of a bit of a weird dichotomy that at the same time his style is very unique but also just a little derivative. It does come off sounding very similar to artists like Tosin Abasi. Clearly there's a very heavy influence from that as well. So am I going to say this is a great, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 record? No, it's probably more like a 7.5, maybe an 8 if you're really feeling this style of music. And if you can sort of get through some of the more monotonous elements of this record, just the fact that a lot of the songs kind of come from a very similar vein, there's a lot to enjoy on this record. The guitar work is stellar. Definitely a step above Mechanical Nations in my opinion. But this is definitely an album I would start off by streaming on Spotify before I actually went out and purchased a full vinyl copy of it. That being said, the album cover is really striking. A picture of one of the neighborhoods of Caracas. It's just a really stark but beautiful image, and I think it complements the music on this album really well. There's a sort of a stark nature to it. In fact, that's kind of one of the things where I almost want to criticize the record for this, but I think the more I listen to it, the more I enjoy this aspect of it, where, traditionally on a metal album, you would double track your guitars. You would have one track of guitar on your left channel, one track of guitar on your right channel, and they would mesh together to make this really beefy, heavy experience. But because of the way Felix Martin plays, it sounds like it's all just one guitar track the whole way through, rather than, multi-tracking and layering all these heavy guitars to beef up the sound. It doesn't make it sound any less heavy, but it sounds a little more raw. It sounds a little more... If a professional metal band had done the same thing, you would say it sounds very demo-like, but it actually really kind of sets a contrast in the guitar work really well with this album, where the heavier parts kind of sound a little raw, or they sound a little more emotionally connected. So, again, I sound like I'm being really harsh with this record when I talk about how a lot of the tracks kind of sound the same, and it does drag on a little at the end, but there's so much passion and love in this music that I don't feel it's quite fair to be that critical with it. You can really tell that there's a lot of heart in this music, which is more than I could say for a lot of instrumental guitar records out there nowadays. Absolutely, I think you should really check this album out. I highly recommend streaming it on Spotify. It's a really good record. Maybe not the best record you're going to hear all year, but I think there's a lot to love about Felix Martin's music, and he does a wonderful job of painting these impressive soundscapes with just his guitar, a bass, and drums. Anyway, thank you for watching. Low Show out.